In today's tutorial, we are going to talk about easing, how to apply different speed to our animation. We are going to learn about a speed graph and the motion path of our animation. To create animation in After Effects, we create keyframes. For this simple animation, in which a circle moves from left to right, I have created a circle and then I have expanded my transform options, choosing position, and created a keyframe in the beginning of my timeline. And then I moved the time indicator 24 frames or 1 second ahead, and then I moved the circle from left to right, so a keyframe automatically is created. This animation has 2 keyframes that you can see in your timeline. But in actuality, it consists of 24 frames. Let me show you how it looks if you could see 24 frames involved in this animation. In After Effects, we don't see the in-between frames. We just see the main keyframes that we created. After Effects create the in-between frames automatically. We can also notice them in our motion path. This path that you see here that has some dots on it is called motion path of your animation. And these little dots are the in-between frames. But why this is important? When creating animation in After Effects, the default transition created here has a constant speed, as you can see in this animation. But this is not something that happens often in real life. If you look at things around you, you can see that their speed of movements involve different level of easing. For instance, this ball rolls in fast and then slows down and stops. Or cars, for example. When they start moving, they speed up gradually. This concept in animation is called easing. We create easing in animation by manipulating the in-between frames. Okay, for example, look at this image. The first ball is the one we created in After Effects. Look at how frames are positioned in this motion. This results in a constant speed in a transition. Now look at the second ball and how the frames are positioned. The start of the transition has less frame, and at the end we have more frames piled up together. This means that the start of motion is faster and then it slows down and stops. So it has a sort of ease that is created by manipulating the in-between frames. So how we apply easing in After Effects? Because we just have, as you can see here, 2 main keyframes. In After Effects, we have some options that allows us to create different form of ease and speed. So we can change the form of our keyframe, or we can change the form of our speed graph. But let's see the different types of keyframes that we have in After Effects first. The first type of keyframe is the one that we create by default, is called linear. And it looks like a diamond. The motion between 2 keyframes has a constant speed. The second one is easy ease. The keyframe looks like a sandwich, and the animation between 2 keyframes that both are easy ease, it starts with a slow motion, it speeds up, and then it slows down again. The third one is easy ease in. Using this type of keyframes, the animation starts fast and it then slows down. The fourth type is easy ease out. In this type of keyframe, the animation starts slow, then it speeds up. Now let's see how we apply different sort of ease to our keyframes. You can select one keyframe or multiple keyframes. Right-click, go to Keyframe Assistant, and then you have these 3 types of ease. There are shortcuts also included. As soon as you choose easy ease, your keyframe shapes changes, and also this little dot position in your motion path changes too. So now you can see you have more dots in the beginning and at the end, which means your motion is slower at the beginning and at the end. And you have less dots in the middle, which means you have a faster animation in the middle. You can change back to your default keyframe by selecting the key, holding Command or Control, and clicking on your keyframe. Then you can choose Easy Ease In or Easy Ease Out forms. What happens if we don't want any in-between frames between our keyframes? Look at this animation. If I play it, I see a motion like that. But what I want is actually, I want the circle jump from 1 to 2 and from 2 to 3. And I don't want any motion or transition in between. This little dots or in between frames needs to be gone. We have actually another option that allows us to remove the in between frames. You just need to select your keyframes, right click, and choose Toggle Hold Keyframe. Then you will have an animation like this. And if you look at your motion path, you no longer see those little dots which indicate your in-between frames. So by applying easing to your animation, you create motions that are more believable and also more interesting. We can even manipulate the speed of our motion and the way in between frames are positioned even more by using a speed graph. You can find a speed graph in Graph Editor in your timeline. Clicking on Graph Editor, you can see a speed graph, but sometimes you might be in another graph called Value Graph. So if by any chance you open your Graph Editor and you see this, you just need to right click and then choose a speed graph instead. Now, here you're able to actually, here you can see the graph form of your transition. So it looks like a curve and it has a slower motion, and then it speeds up and then it slows down. But you can actually manipulate this because both of your keyframes in the graph editor has a handle and you're able to change its form. So if I manipulate the beginning of my graph like this, I even pile up more in between frames in the beginning of my motion. So it's gonna be even more slower when it starts. I can do the same at the end. So Graph Editor is something that you can play with and see what you get and create interesting transition and speed. If you want to go back to your timeline and keyframe, you just need to click again on a Graph Editor. One other useful thing to know is that we can manipulate our motion paths manually because your motion path has two handles. You just need to locate them and you're able to create interesting curves for your motion. This is useful for different sort of animation. Let me give you an example. So here I have created a motion for my click icon. Moving from right to left, I created easy ease for both of my keyframes, and I even manipulated the speed graph to this form. So the motion is interesting, but I can even make this animation better by creating a little bit of curve. I just make sure that I'm on one of the keyframes so I can see my motion path. I find those handles that I mentioned earlier, and I just create a little bit of curve. Now my animation has a little bit of curve and it might be even more interesting than its previous form. Please now go to Moodle and do the exercise provided for this class.